Welcome back to the Rum Ration, the podcast that uncorks the human stories behind military history. I'm Rejoy.
And I'm Colin. Now, war has always had its poets, from Homer singing of heroes on the plains of Troy to soldiers in muddy trenches trying to make sense of it all. Quite a manly sport it seemed at the time. And somewhere between the shield wall and the shell crater, war poetry came to capture it all: the courage, the chaos, and the cost.
So, as you may have guessed, this week on the Rum Ration, we're raising a glass to war poetry, the words that have outlasted every battle. And I'm excited and thrilled to say that we're joined by one of Canada's greatest poets to help us explore how war and verse have always marched side by side. Welcome, George Elliott Clarke. For those of you who don't know the very few who don't know George Elliott Clarke, let me give you a small introduction. George Elliott Clarke is one of Canada's foremost poets, playwrights, and literary voices. A former Parliamentary Poet Laureate of Canada and Poet Laureate of Toronto, his work spans poetry, drama, and fiction, each marked by lyrical power and a masterful command of language. He earned degrees in English from the University of Waterloo, Dalhousie University, and a PhD from Queen's University, and has received honorary doctorates from several prestigious institutions, including Dalhousie, Waterloo, and the Royal Military College of Canada. Among his many honors are the Governor-General's Literary Award for Poetry, appointment to the Order of Canada, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, and election as a Fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. George is currently a professor at the University of Toronto and continues to explore the ties between history, identity, and the enduring power of poetry to shape how we understand our world. A very big welcome to you, George Elliott Clarke.
Thank you, Rejoy and Colin. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
Well, let's start where all wars and all poems begin, with heroes, hubris, and Homer. George, will you kick us off with an excerpt from The Trojan Women by Gwendolyn McEwen? And if you could just let us know a little bit about her as well, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, very quickly, I want to go back to Homer for just very briefly succinctly to say that Homer was actually in the Iliad. He's writing a great anti-war poem because both sides were guilty of massive atrocities, all looked upon beamed upon essentially with smiles by one god or goddess or another, right? Keeping in mind that the gods and goddesses were all involved in the Trojan War. And so there are horrific massacres and atrocities committed on both sides. And it's important to keep that in mind because people often complain about violence in literature and violence in films. Look at, in terms of classical Western literature, few works are more violent than the Iliad. I got to tell you, it's very
so true.
But I want to come back to Gwendolyn McEwen, great poet, born in Toronto, I think 1941. Unfortunately, also deceased in Toronto as of 1987. Governor General's Award winner twice for Canada's highest honor for poetry. And she was really attracted to ancient scripts, what she thought of as ancient alphabets. So she was familiar with Egyptian hieroglyphics, with Hebrew, with Roman alphabet and its origins, as well as Greek. And because of her knowledge of Greek, she decided to translate a play by Euripides about the women left behind in the Trojan War and how devastated their homes and households and societies were by the great, huge calamity of war. So I'm just going to read a short section here. This is in the voice of Cassandra, the great prophetess of doom, which makes sense. You know, if you don't have prophetess.
I have a cousin, Cassandra. If you ever met her, you also would refer to her as a great prophet of doom.
Exactly.
I'm pretty safe. I'm pretty sure she's not listening to this.
Yeah, we better hope not, right?
Or I'm in trouble.
But here she is, and she's complaining about the Trojan War. So she says, "You fell by the thousands, you poor fools, and all because of a whore called Helen. or whatever she embodied, whatever she stood for, whatever smug, self-righteous rules she had to live by, and for her ridiculous husband, the mighty, invincible cuckold, Menelaus. You fought here on our shores, you miserable children, and you died. And then the chorus steps in and they sing, Troy dies, everything dies, everything dies but death. And I come back to Cassandra, poor warrior, miserable child. She's speaking to Talthybius. How long have you been here in Troy? Do you have any children of your own? You don't know, of course not. Even if you had, you'd never have seen them. Absurd wars create absurd heroes. Absurd wars create absurd heroes. All wars are absurd. Therefore, all heroes are absurd. And all this filthy nonsense will go down in history. Is that not so, Talthybius? There are no good guys and no bad guys, just all you silly little soldiers. So even though this is Euripides, not Homer, and even though it's Gwendolyn McEwen's translation of Euripides, she's making the same point that Homer makes in the Iliad, which is that war is in the end. And to sort of bring in Shakespeare here already, a tale of idiots signifying nothing, to mangle Macbeth here for a second. And a tale of sound and fury signifying nothing, for crying out loud. I mean, that's one way of looking at war. And we could think of all the satires from Catch-22 to many others that really represent and put forward how wantonly absurd war can be. And on the other hand, as we all know, coming from a nation which has distinguished itself in fighting for liberty, making great sacrifices for liberty and democracy, that sometimes war is necessary. And I say that as someone who is truly a pacifist. I truly am. And at the same time, I do want to signify the heroism and bravery and dedication and devotion of those of us who decide to put on the uniform and wage war for extremely important ideals, as well as in terms of defense of our own nation.
George, I think because we're in the Remembrance period right now, and this is going to come out on Remembrance Day, I think it's really important to note your words there about the absurdity of war. I mean, it's not your words yourself, but the way you carefully explained that so well, because I think when we sit there and we look at the staggering list of names, injustice of the dead, and yet we know that for every dead, there's probably 2 or 3 or 4 who were severely wounded, and then probably another 2 or 3 on top of that, times that, who were wounded with mental wounds as well. You really drove it home what you're talking about, saying the absurdity, and I really appreciate what you're saying here. And because here at the Rum Ration we're kind of slow, we like to start things at the beginning, and we're going to talk origins. And so I guess Homer's about as far back as you can go. I really love how you reminded us at the start here that Homer is the Iliad, and then what you're talking about with the Trojan women. Probably one of the first and greatest war poems was really an anti-war poem. It's not glorifying it. And those words that you first started out with when you're reciting, wow, did that ever drive it home? Very powerful. It really gives us everything, the glory, the grief, and the gods picking sides like it's just a mere football match.
Yeah, right on, absolutely.
And it's surprisingly human, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about a poem that was written 2,000 years ago, back in the antiquity of time, and you've got all the elements that everyone can relate to today. Achilles sulking, Hector terrified, the impossible ideas, like what you mentioned about the absurdity of war, as Colin also brought up again. I mean, they're impossible ideas they expect people to live up to back then, even now today. Do you think the Iliad still defines the way we write or think about war poetry?
It really should. If it doesn't, it should, because of the fact that it is.
If you're a student of George, take notes. If you're a student of George, take notes. Just saying. It might be on the test.
Yeah, well, I'm reminded of the great French Jewish and philosopher and pacifist Simone Weil, who witnessed the horrors of World War II, and wrote about the struggles and sufferings of workers. She was in London and writing from London during the Blitz. She was very concerned about the death and destruction of workers, specifically working class people on the mainland of Europe, as well as those who died under the Blitz in London and England in general, and how war is especially pitiless when it comes to the poor, to workers, working class people, and so on, as well as of course women and children. But the poem that she used to write about World War II was the Iliad. She does a whole anatomy of the Iliad as a way of explaining her own pacifist position, and her critique of war in general. So that's just a way of saying that it remains perennially important for anybody who really wants to think about the devastation of war, and how sometimes it may seem to be impossible to avoid sometimes. Although when we look at history, we can see that almost every war is predictable in terms of the run up, in terms of arms buildup, weapons testing, weapons sales, and so on. And I don't think any of us can look at today's headlines, for instance, and feel that a chance of war is out of reach. No, I personally believe that we may be on the advent of a horrific series of wars, if not just one utterly annihilating world war, such as a World War III or something like it. Just given the fact that even just the past week, we've had the current president of the United States talking about, once again, ramping up on testing of nuclear weapons. So it's a long way of saying that the issues and ideas and the villains and the heroes and the battles put forward and accounted for so powerfully and imagistically in the Iliad remain relevant. To use a much abused word, relevant.
Yeah. Well, speaking of relevance, so the Iliad is really the standard, I guess, of war poetry and what it can all be used for the future. And so let's fast forward a couple thousand years to another, lesser known playwright, Shakespeare,
Yes.
giving us battle poetry of a different kind, a little bit more jingoistic and a little bit more razzmatazz. You got kings whipping their men into glory with words instead of swords, right?
Well, it's once more unto the breach stuff, isn't it? Stirring, theatrical, dangerously good PR for war, though,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, that's one of those those poems that and literature that everyone sort of reaches into, especially when you're looking for inspiration. You're going into something challenging. This is where you really dig down and pull out your stuff, it seems.
Yeah, and talking about good PR, here's one for poetry. George, will you read us an excerpt from Henry V, particularly the moving poem, The St. Crispin's Day Speech?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll be so happy to read that for you. I happen to have been blessed to have seen the Stratford production. I brought my daughter along to see
Nice.
it.
Oh,
It was about
yes.
10 years ago, I think, that we rolled over to Stratford from Toronto to see the production of Henry V, and it was brilliant. I've also seen Kenneth Branagh's great film version
Yes.
of that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
play.
That's brilliant. That's a lovely movie.
Oh
Yeah.
my golly, it is, and it's got everything, and I think the play really speaks to that. It's a very human play in terms of recognizing the place for heroism, as well as the context of suffering and absurdity. Once again, it's all there. But in this play, at this moment, this speech, the focus is on the need to rally the men to potentially lose their lives in defense of their king and country. So here it is from Henry V. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when the day is named and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors and say, Tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then he will strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot. But he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day.
Wow. What a great
Beautiful, beautiful.
rendition. George,
Yeah.
thank you.
No, you
Colin used to recite it when we were in Gagetown.
Absolutely.
when we
Every
were
morning,
heading
that's
to
how
the
I'd
field.
wake up,
But
Rejoy. I'd be whispering
wasn't-
into his ear.
Yes, wasn't quite the same power and delivery.
But George, what do you think? What do you think it is about that speech that still stirs people, soldiers, actors, audiences, more than 400 years later? What do you think it is? I mean, I know I have my reasons why, but I'd love to hear yours.
You know, that's such a dangerous question, because all of a sudden I'm driven back to thinking of the age-old, I'll use a literary critical term, phallocentrism, the encouragement to manliness in terms of,
Yeah. Oh,
of
absolutely.
defense and so on.
Yes,
But we got to
yes.
remember that in terms of our development as a species, as Homo sapiens, as human beings, who came out of battles with Neanderthals, but also bred with Neanderthals. We're all part
Yes.
Neanderthal, right? But
Yeah.
to make the point, we begin as animals that are suddenly attain consciousness. But as animals, we are bred, and I'm thinking specifically of men, of males, we are bred to defend our tribe, our defenseless persons, women, maybe women who are pregnant or young mothers, as well as, of course, children. Because if we cannot do that, there is a very good chance that we will be wiped out or enslaved or tortured and made and taken prisoner, and all of our goods, our harvests and precious goods stolen and thieved away, robbed from us by a stronger, more warrior-like, more aggressive and hostile tribe.
So it's in our genes.
It's in our
genes, essentially.
in other words, that's right. And it's only with the coming of civilization that we can begin to think about the possibility of peace and peaceful progress and inventions undertaken to make life more comfortable, to make the harvests more abundant, to allow for those of us who might take a drink or two, to allow the yeast to allow for the ale and beer to be created, for the grapes to be harvested and distilled into wine, and the grains to be distilled into liquors of various capacities and incapacitating capacities.
We prefer rum, of course, on the
We
Rum
prefer
Ration
rum,
podcast.
yes. Sugar, can't leave out sugar, right? So, what the long story here, and I'll keep it succinct, is that it's by becoming civilized or more civilized that as we leave behind an utterly basic state of nature, that we begin to honor the ideas of marriage and procreation and the idea of living to a right old age in peace and security, that we can then begin to think of downplaying the necessity of war, and then constructing, as we have constructed since 1945, although it's deeply imperiled now, a world in which war was supposed to become less likely. so that we could enjoy prosperity, so we could have prosperity and enjoy it, and have a leisure society and have a welfare state and all of those things. But the lesson of history is still there. Because if you want to preserve all of this bounty and all these good things, you need to have a dual track of diplomacy and defense. Diplomacy and defense.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
you know, in the best of all possible worlds, you don't want your defense to have to become offensive, but at the same time, you need to have the defense and the diplomacy in order to maintain the peace and prosperity.
And a
Which,
defense that looks like it's capable of an offense, or
yes.
otherwise your adversaries will take advantage of that.
Yes, which is also why so many militaries style themselves now as defense forces, right, across the world. So that's really interesting. And now we're going to move from the medieval period to the mid 19th century, which was also an era where warfare was prevalent throughout the world. Small wars, larger wars. Things really haven't changed all that much. And here we get to talk a little bit about Sir Alfred Tennyson, and the charge of the Light Brigade during the Crimean War. One of my favorite time periods, I have to say, 1854, 1856, when the French and the British went over to the Crimea and fought against the Russians. They're allied with the Turks. And the infamous charge of the Light Brigade. If nobody knows anything about the Crimean War, the one thing they seem to have heard of is the charge of the Light Brigade. Which has nothing to do with electricity for any few people out there wondering. Nothing at all. So here we're talking about, not yet. No gods, no kings, just 600 men and a catastrophic order.
Yes, quote, someone has blundered, end quote. It's that line that cracks the whole thing open, duty versus disaster. And there was a lot of disaster, a lot of blunders throughout the whole Crimea. Like, it's a miracle the British soldiers in particular, didn't just rebel and murder all their officers and go home.
And someone has blundered is a line that can be trumpeted throughout time, I think.
Yes.
Back then and throughout now as well. So, George, will you do the honors for Lord Tennyson's epic poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade? It's one of my all-time favorites, I have to say.
Rejoy and Colin, thank you so much for the invitation to recite this poem. Before I do, I just want to back up on a couple of things, just mention a couple of things very quickly. First of all, we're still fighting over the Crimea. That is to say, Russia is fighting with Ukraine, and Ukraine being backed by NATO forces right now, currently, and the struggle is still over the Crimea. Why? And I will say, for the record, that in my own personal very humble opinion, most publics in the West have not been apprised of why the Crimea should be fought over. That's for a very simple reason, as you both know. It's through the Crimean Peninsula that the great Russian fleet can make its way into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. That's the strategic importance of the Crimea. And from a Russian standpoint, there is absolutely no way that they were going to give up that piece of real estate, because then there goes their fleet, there goes their access to the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. And I think that I'm going to use a terrible word here, but it's important for the poem, propaganda, a German word for information, propaganda, right? Made infamous by Goebbels during the Nazi regime, the Nazi era. But all nations do propaganda, especially in wartime. But I got to remember Winston Churchill, the very quotable Winston Churchill, who said that the very best propaganda is the truth. And I agree with that.
And then I'll push back a little bit. I actually served a bit as a PSYOPs officer, psychological operations, which uses we don't use the word propaganda anymore because of the negative connotation. But there's nothing. The word itself is value neutral. It's all about just putting out your perspective, your point of view. And you're absolutely right to quote Churchill on that, because let's face it, truth should come through, and that's the best way to be able to overcome any obstacles with that, is by saying the truth. And if your truth can clean and cleanse the stink and contagion of the lies that are being put forth, and I think that's why the word fell into such disfavor when you had people like Goebbels, who was doing nothing but spewing out vile hate, and in the word of propaganda, no one else wants to be associated with that word. But I think the word itself is relatively value neutral.
I agree, and thank you so much, Colin, for that. But to just go on and sorry for continuing to use the word, but especially in terms of conflict or potential conflict, all nations put forward their particular spin on the truth.
Absolutely.
And of course, I think, was it von Clausewitz who said that the first casualty of war is truth?
Truth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was him who said that. So I'm keeping that context in mind and keeping in mind the vileness of Goebbels. And I thank you for the pronunciation of the name and his particular extremely vicious.
I'm not sure I pronounced it right. Rejoy is the one who could speak German here.
Goebbels. Yeah, it's a Goebbels.
Thank you so much. All right. And so the charge of Light Brigade has to be put in that context as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That Alfred Lord Tennyson,
Yes.
as the poet laureate of Great Britain, of Her Majesty Queen Victoria's empire, who was also simultaneously the Empress of India. We must never
That's right.
forget that, right?
That's right.
She
didn't.
No, she certainly
She certainly did not. She was
British
very pleased
class
to be
did
the
not.
Empress.
Very pleased.
And I've got to put it into another geopolitical context here that I often think about. And you can both correct me on this. But if you're sitting in Whitehall or in Pall Mall and Buckingham Palace addressing the Empress Victoria and so on, who's also the ruler of British North America, that clutch of colonial entities which had remained loyal to the crown, to King George III after the American Revolution broke out, and you are in command of the greatest empire the world has ever seen, upon which the sun never set, and you want to keep it that way. You're looking at the globe and you're trying to imagine what entity, what nation in the world could potentially rise to challenge the power of Great Britain. And if you are Henry Kissinger of your time, of the mid-19th century, there are only two nations on the planet that could possibly rise to rival Great Britain. And they are the United States of America, which is a continental power and which is grabbing up as much territory as it can, and also reunified Prussia. These are the two
Yes.
nations on the whole
Yes.
planet that anybody thinking geopolitically in the mid-19th century is going to understand could potentially be a rival. Right.
And Prussia was also highly industrialized at that point as well, just like Britain was.
That's right. And of course, you'll remember that was the naval crisis of the early 20th century that gave rise to what
Yes.
turned into the Great War, World War I, right?
Yes.
So anyway, but to come back specifically to the poem. So if you're thinking about, you want to maintain the glory and the power and the glory of the British Empire, you need to make sure that your soldiery from the playing fields of Eton and so on, and especially the officer class, are imbued with an appropriate warrior spirit to defend the realm, which includes the far-flung colonies and so forth of the empire. And that's why it was so important for the poet laureate of Great Britain to dust off the tragedy and the incredible mortal bungling of the Light Brigade and turn it into something heroic.
Yes.
As
Mortal
propaganda.
bungling. That is perfect.
I love that. We love that term. Yes.
So here it is. And we thank Alfred Lord Tennyson for this stirring poem. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade. Charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, armed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode, and well, into the jaws of death, to the mouth of hell, rode the 600. Flashed all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Then they rode back but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade. Noble 600.
Amazing. It's still such a stirring poem. It takes you right into the heart of it. George, how does Tennyson manage to celebrate the bravery of this among the futility and the cost of it? He talks quite clearly about the futility and the cost of it, but at the same time celebrates the incredible bravery of these soldiers. How does he manage to do that?
Well, we know that as Canadians, we know that. Because what about the heroism of our troops who died at Dieppe? What about the heroism of our troops who died at Vimy Ridge? What about the heroism of our troops who on D-Day stormed their way inland by 20 kilometers, I think it was?
Yeah.
The only Allied
furthest of any of the
force,
divisions.
yeah, who made it off the beach of Normandy and struck inland. I think of the bravery of our troops at Ortona, right? Taking on the entire
that's right.
Hitler line, the Gothic line, and so
Yeah,
on.
they called it Little Stalingrad. Yeah.
My golly, right? Liberating the Netherlands, liberating Sicily, going up the boot of Italy, and at the same time, sometimes suffering grievously because of the mistakes of officers. And that was especially true in the Great War, when Canadians were supposed to be subservient to British officers who did not know what the hell they were doing. Excuse me for my bluntness here. But so in the end, for any fighting force, all you've got left is your bravery. That's all you've got left. When you don't have the armament, you don't have the equipment, you don't have functioning authority in terms of a home front, in terms of officers. All you've got left is your individual pluck and the esprit de corps to carry
Yeah,
you.
it comes down to the basic humanity. And I think you started this off when you were talking about the propaganda aspects of it. And if I'm going to be a little bit more crude here, you were being a little bit more genteel than I would. But I think Tennyson here was trying to polish a turd. Let's face it, he was trying to put a lipstick on a pig, if we will. I mean, it was embarrassing. Britain was the greatest power at the time, as you rightfully pointed out, and their approach to this war was abysmal.
It was abysmal.
The logistics was a joke. They had a strong navy. They abandoned their army. They weren't supplied properly. Disease was rampant, and this was a complete cock-up of an operation. They should never have sent those troops down there. So lightfully putting someone had blundered. So you're talking about propaganda being mostly, most effective is when it's mostly the truth. he slid in that little sliver of truth. Someone had blundered.
Well, Lord Raglan, the British commander-in-chief, used to refer to the Russians as the French, as the enemy.
Yes.
And had to be reminded, we're not
French on our side this time.
Yes. But to be fair, he did lose an arm at Waterloo, poor guy. So on that stirring note, I think this is a good spot to pause for our famous fantasy sponsor bit. So George, we do this little segment where we have a fantasy sponsor.
Now, if you know anyone who really wants to spend money on us, we're happy to.
We'll ditch the fantasy part in a second. But since we are not in that enviable position, we'll continue on. We'll plug away, much like the infantry do.
Mm-hmm.
So today's fantasy sponsor is Light Brigade Brandy.
Smooth, fiery, and charging straight for your liver.
It's the spirit. It's the spirit of doomed heroism in a bottle, perfect for toasting courage, catastrophe, or both.
Light Brigade Brandy, 6 shot forward, none return. Oh, we're bad people. So
Yeah,
this is where it all really kind of begins, eh? From glory to grief,
yeah.
from bronze spears to blundering charges. But what exactly makes these poems work? What makes them great war poetry?
I think that you already used the word that is most applicable to humanity, because as I like to point out to my students, every poem is a little theater. Every poem is like many of us do not understand that, and that's why we have trouble reading poetry, especially modern poetry or even postmodern poetry. We're not sure how to respect or feel the words on the page. But every well-written poem is actually a little play with at least one speaker who is giving us a statement based on the emotion that he, she, they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about the play as being a little theater, and of course, war, we actually talk about theaters of war. I mean, war
Yes.
is conflict,
Yeah.
is tragedy, and tragic comedy, unfortunately, and absurdity. It's theater of the absurd as well as being tragic and comic. Can give rise to, can inspire great poems, great poetry, pointing out the tragedy, pointing out the comedy, pointing out the heroism, pointing out the absurdity of these great conflicts. And every conflict is great if you happen to be on the receiving end of the incoming spears or arrows or cannonballs or missiles or whatever. You're not going to think, oh, this is a little tempest in a teapot. You're going to think, holy smokes, my neighbor's gone. Their house is gone. The hospital is obliterated. The power isn't working. The power is off. Right? How are we going to eat? There's a run on the grocery store. War is tremendous suffering, no matter how small scale it is. And so the poems remind us of that. You think about W.H. Auden, September 1, 1939, right? And those great two opening lines, lay your dreaming head, my love, human on my sleepless arm. Or I think that's it. And forgive me if I mixed up a couple of adjectives in that line, but the important point, I think the important, most vital word in that great war poem, which is also an anti-war poem, is a sleepless on my human arm. Right? Like that's what it comes down to. The feats of arms, and we call them armaments. It's like, it's my arm, for crying out loud, that wielding the sword or pressing the buttons to launch the drones and the missiles, right? And still it's arms, it's armaments. It's all human, right? We've been gifted with these wonderful appendages that can do so many good things. And at the same time, the hand can become a fist. At the same time, the hand can grip the trigger of a gun or a rifle or a machine gun and so on. The fingers can do that. So no matter how many.
You made such a good point too at the beginning about like the Iliad being anti-war, and now I'm starting to see that more and more throughout some of these war poems coming through. And the Iliad, it felt like it was written for the ear, and I know it was meant to be recited or to be memorized and recited, right? So it was meant to be remembered and passed down by the people who had fought and survived.
Oh,
Yeah, and then you've got Shakespeare, right? I mean, that's performance adrenaline.
Oh, yeah, big time.
And at, and when you talk, right, and when you talk about propaganda, George, I mean that's right on the money with Shakespeare. When you hear him talking about the Band of Brothers, in my mind, and as you recited that, I went back and remembered why I joined up again. Like all the camaraderie, the I don't know, it's everything rolled into one. You just want to go and you get patriotic and you want to sign up.
Well, yeah. Then you get Tennyson, who that rolling rhythm that sounds just like hooves pounding downhill. Like if you can't get all riled up when that's being beaten into you at your boarding school and wanting to try and measure up, it's of course you're inspired to want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
George, what do you think what is it that makes war poetry great? Is it the emotion? Is it the craft? Is it the honesty? Or do you think good war poetry glorifies or exposes?
I think it does both. I think it can glorify again the heroism and courage of those who give their lives in defense of others, or defense of civilization, in defense of a religion, in defense of just simply the possibility of procreation and peace and prosperity, and having to give the ultimate sacrifice, most noble sacrifice in order to preserve and protect what they believe to be so vital, more important than their own lives, more important than their own safety, their own security, their own flesh and blood, life and breath. And so the honesty comes from recognizing that. The greatness comes from the honesty of recognizing the sacrifice, but at the same time, recognizing the grief and the sorrow, including for the enemy, especially the defeated enemy, because their lives are not going to be so happy going forward, at least for a couple of decades or so. And so it's a great grief as well that one has to entertain or understand in writing about war. And I think that I'm suddenly reminded of Walt Whitman, who, by the way, could not stand Tennyson. Walt Whitman, because he thought Tennyson was too imperialistic, right? So he had a point about that. But Walt Whitman was a great poet of the U.S. Civil War. He was a nurse to wounded Union soldiers, so he comforted them as they lay dying. He rubbed the salve on their wounds. He poured the liquor in their mouths to help them deal with the pain that they were suffering, and so on. And of course, he looked upon Lincoln as the great leader, and so on, right? So he was a war poet, a very humanitarian war poet, but still, he understood what was at stake in the U.S. Civil War, and he knew what side he was on. But he could still, what he really hated about the war was the destruction of all those young male bodies, because he was gay, he was homoerotic in his writing, and that's part of what he saw as being one of the most pitiable things about war, was that these gorgeous, beautiful young men were maimed and ruined and destroyed in war.
Yeah, that's the power of it, isn't it? Really, I mean, when you sort of tie it all together, and war poetry really does bring that out, the emotion, the looking deep within yourself and trying to understand and make sense of the chaos and turn it into something ordered, something that still hits us in the gut 100 years later. George, do you have anything of your own that fits in with this subject today? I mean, I know you're obviously you're a very great poet in your own right, but is there something specifically for war that deals with war poetry?
Yeah, I do have something up that I want to read or recite. And thank you so much for the invitation. This is a great.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you here.
And I just want to say, look, I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and as a Haligonian, I've been to hell and back. I'm sorry to put it that way, but as a Haligonian, I come from one of the greatest naval ports on the North Atlantic. I come from a port that has seen the Battle of the Atlantic, a port that was destroyed, devastated in the Great Explosion of 1917, which was an offshoot of the First World War, the Great War. I come from a place where I saw sailors all the time walking up and down the street. I come from a place where
possibly my brothers, but hopefully they were well behaved.
Colin, when you say that, I've got to remind everybody that the pubs in Halifax stay open until 3 a.m.
That's right.
And also, we have more pubs and taverns per capita than any other city in North America. And it's all because of, we got 7 universities too. So I got to the students are a factor, but so are the fighting men and women in uniform in Nova Scotia, in Halifax specifically. Right. So that's a way of saying that I grew up in I was born in 1960, so only 15 years after World War II had ended. And only 11 years after NATO was founded in 1949, which meant we had a lot of NATO warships visiting Halifax as well. And we also had Soviet fishing, so-called fishing boats.
Fishing trawlers with a lot of radio equipment for some reason.
Yeah.
Weird. Big masts, radar masts to hunt fish.
Tell people which fish you caught.
Yeah, we'd have the American sailors, the British sailors, and we'd have the Russian fishermen and the Cuban fishermen, right? So it was like you had everything coming through Halifax in that sense. And some of that rubbed off on me. I was never in the cadets, but I was familiar with the stories, very familiar with the stories, and appreciated the sacrifice that was made in the Battle of the Atlantic, and we always remembered it very, very well as I was growing up. So
And there was also the explosion of 1917, which leveled Halifax. I'm sure that was still very much
yeah,
in the city's memory of that time, right?
oh yeah. Well, when I was 7 years old, 67 was the 50th anniversary. And one of the things I insisted on doing when I was appointed Parliamentary Poet Laureate in 2016, I was asked by a Halifax reporter, "What do you want to do in this position?" I said, "I want to write the poem about the Halifax explosion and recite it on December 6, 2017." And I got to do that backed up by the Nova Scotia Symphony Orchestra, right?
Oh,
So that was one of
wow.
the biggest things for
Wow.
me as Poet Laureate was to be able to recite that poem, a long poem about the devastation of the city. And I'm from the north end of Halifax, which was laid waste by that explosion, December 6th, 1917. So, and then of course, you keep in mind that Americans trying to figure out the devastation of the first atomic bombs studied the Halifax explosion, in which there was a mushroom cloud and total devastation at ground zero. And so they used the lessons of the Halifax explosion to prepare the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending World War II in the Pacific. Right. But anyway, I'm sorry to give you all that. So
That's fascinating.
No, that was wonderful.
I've been a fellow traveler with warriors, I guess, without having actually being one myself, except for going to war with words every now and then. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna recite this poem. Alfred Lord Tennyson drafts The Charge of the Light Brigade. And in this poem, I was trying to put myself in his position, his mindset. Keep in mind, he's got a pretty comfortable life, as I do. Thank God, praise God. But yet he's got to turn in this poem that's going to inspirit everybody and, as Colin would say, polish the turd. Uh,
Positive spin on things, I believe.
polish the spin on things. Absolutely. And one more point as I reflect on Tennyson's poem, I mean, his, of course, reference to the Valley of Death is going to register as Psalm 23 for many, many, many of us, right? And so he's also putting a religious gloss on this sacrifice, right? In terms of David's psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Here, these guys have gone through the valley of death, and not many of them have come back, right? But there's a sense of the nobility and the mission that David speaks to in that great work of Hebrew scripture, the Psalms. Anyway, so here it is. Alfred Lord Tennyson drafts The Charge of the Light Brigade. That valley of death was a char-smudged, burnt earth zone, reeking of scorched electric ozone stench, the streaked smoke of lightning launching arms, Russian vodka oiling, thundering, boiling cannon, hard to tally robust altruism of do and die courage from a London study where the only body broken is bread, a crumpet, a croissant. And all the bleeding is ruddy wine shipped past lips and gorged in the gullet. How do I draft tsunami of hooves and flame of swords commanded to hand in hand? Stymie, i.e., exterminate Crimea's Russians. How to award a prize to a self-abolishing charge. Insupportable, French pronunciation, versus contemptuous cursing canon, while our British bawled, shrieks, yells, 300 plus horses shattered, exploding under the marrying barrage, while the smirking foe hunched contentedly behind their cannon, crunching stalwarts and stallions into mulch and mirrored. Rococo were the ranked corpses and exceptional alabaster splayed amid the general khaki, smog, and turgid smirch. Romanesque were the stiffened limbs, sprawled bits of broken statuary, intertwisted with smashed equestrian. Spy a loveliness that betters beauty. Spy a loveliness that betters beauty. Intense mirth, that juvenile emotion thrilled the hill-top Russians cropping the downhill Brits. Their cannons swiveled half globularly to pell-mell pick to pieces heroes unperturbedly upright in superb saddles. These Albrecht Dürer Apollos in newsprint black and white who were red serge, blue serge, surging in white marble, battered back by the indefinite hail of hit or miss fact, their titanic hearts encouraged by satanic hope, until half got swirled milk white into the char black catastrophe, thus surfacing as the deathless cream of a guiltily grimacing gilded age. I shan't write out of accumulated vanity, our Victorian grandeur, all haute bourgeoisie, that sees us tramp and clamp the seas to plant our truculent, succulent youth. Lilies rendered poppies to decorate vulgar trenches after heeding the sirens of drums, to be such impressive suicides, our trenchant imperial signature, the impress of our empress. I do not seek to oust anti-monopolists. Marx doth have a point about our mills, or outdo the parochial bugler of the Elysian field, or codify preening for condottieri, or quaff eloquence camouflaging nonsense. I will say nothing derogatory. Gods in human shape, but only, I will say nothing derogatory about their characters. Gods in human shape, but only register how the Light Brigade unscrolled scripture over fire. 2nd of
Brilliant.
December, 1854.
Brilliant. George Elliott Clarke original on the podcast. Love it. Love it. And although you titled it Tennyson, he's composing his famous poem, but everything that you brought up there can go right across time. When I was listening to the rhythm, the cadence, and some of the lyrics that you brought up, and the trenches. Of course, in the Crimean War, they had trenches, but that is carried forward to the First World War, to the Second World War. Now, Colin and I in training, we learned one of the first things we did was learn how to dig trenches. And that's being done now, it goes right across time, all of it. Quite immensely powerful, really.
It's wow. Everything you just said is excuse the pun, trenchant.
We love a good pun here on the Rum Ration podcast. We're all about those.
You fit right in, George. You fit right in.
You're now going to have to get a matching tattoo, unfortunately.
Wow. And I read The Art of War, and I also read a book on the history of warfare a long time ago. But one of the points that sticks in my mind, I forget the name of the author. I can share it with you later. But he makes this great point, and it was about Carthage, the Roman assault on Carthage, or Carthage, rather.
Yeah.
And he says that the author says that this was absolutely essential to go to Carthage and lay waste to it, because it meant that they had to project force through naval supremacy. I just love that phrase, like project force through naval supremacy. And of course, they had the triremes and the galleons and so on, right? But then you take that forward into the early part of the 21st century, and you've got aircraft carriers. Right? It's the same idea: force projections, maritime defense. Right.
Yep.
We're gonna
and the 19th century British gunboat diplomacy.
Yep. that's all back in style again. You look at the coast of Venezuela right now, right? Yeah. So it's amazing. This goes back to what you're saying before about how, and this is so true. It's scripturally true. You know, human beings do not change. Unfortunately, we do not change. Despite all the lessons of history and all the lessons of economics, we never change. We still act like, forgive me, Stone Age of folks who think that the only way to preserve whatever we think of as being good is to bash in somebody else's skull when it comes right down to it. And unfortunately, too many other people have the same idea. And so instead of continuing to build a world of peace and prosperity and plenty for all, we get real Neanderthal in everybody, real medieval in everybody. And easy for me to say, because I don't have any easy answers to any of this. But I think that the reason why the war poetry remains relevant is because we have not resolved the fundamental issues with human nature.
Yeah, no, I like the point that you had in your poem about Marx doth have a point about our mills. We need to we need to make sure we're checking inside. Like when I heard what's he saying there? Yeah, we need to make sure we got our own house in order before we start condemning others.
Yeah, and you know, of course, because you are students of defense. Let me put it that way. That some of the wars have been fought for extremely ignoble reasons.
Yes.
Oh gosh, yes.
You know,
Just a few.
Opium War. You know, like, come on.
Yes.
You're gonna
How
like
dare
fight
you
a
not
war?
buy this product that we're shoving down your throat that's addicting and killing millions of your people? Come on. All right, I'm going to declare war on you for that.
Very unfair. Very unfair.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
wow. George, we were talking earlier about some poems that really hit hard, and a few have hit harder than the next poem we're going to talk about. One that was written by a Canadian soldier who never came home, a Canadian medical officer who had actually served in South Africa before First World War. But before we get into that, it's time to check in with another fantasy sponsor. This time it's the Iliad IPA.
yeah.
Strong enough to fell a Trojan, smooth enough to make you believe you're Achilles.
Brewed with notes of glory, tragedy, and questionable judgment, the Iliad IPA. Conquer responsibly.
Which I think speaks directly to what we were talking about. Conquer responsibly. You know, we don't believe in ignoble wars. So, well, as Colin mentioned, we'd like to talk about a poem written by a Canadian soldier, a very famous poem. And I think this poem is the one poem that almost everybody the world over can sort of, maybe I'm being overly generous, but it seems to epitomize what war is all about. And of course, I'm talking about In Flanders Fields. And it's not just a poem anymore. It's a symbol. And I know for me, as a kid in school, I think this is one of the first poems that I learned, In Flanders Fields. The poppy, which we're wearing in our caps today, the Remembrance. Well, all of it really starts right here, doesn't it?
Before we talk about it, George, would you do us the honor and read it for us?
Yes, I will. And so it was, of course, ironically and sadly, written just a couple weeks before the war came to an end, if I remember properly.
No. He died towards the end, but it was written right after the Second Battle of Ypres, so Canada's first major expansion, and he was writing it out of great personal loss. One of his great friends had just been killed, and McCrae was taking a break from about probably 48 hours straight in the operating theater, and was when I say taking a break, he probably stepped maybe 15 feet away from the operating theater to take a moment and scribble down some thoughts.
So that would be 1915, I believe,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, okay.
It would have been early May, late April, early May 1915.
Thank you for that redirect, and I truly appreciate it. So here it is: In Flanders Fields, which of course is in Belgium, by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who is from Guelph, Ontario. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, high, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Still so emotionally stirring. It's incredible. George, when you read this poem, what do you feel? What do you think John McCrae is trying to say?
I think he's saying actually a lot in this relatively short poem. He's pointing out that the place of the dead, specifically the Christian dead, is to be placed in fields under crosses, and there's row upon row upon row upon row. And I have visited war cemeteries myself, again in Ortona, Italy, as well as at Vimy Ridge, as well as at the Moroccan. There's a Moroccan memorial near Vimy Ridge as well, and strolled along those rows and rows of the buried. And okay, their place is marked, and it's a place of heroism, a place of reflection, a place that is serene, but for all the most terrible reasons for being serene. But at the same time, nature is still alive. And as a Nova Scotian, the line that comes back to me is from the Nova Scotian song, which is the birds are singing from every tree, right? Our great provincial song. But here in this poem, the larks are still bravely singing. But of course, that's what they're going to do. I mean, to our minds, it may be bravely singing, but they are singing because that is what they do.
That's what they do.
But scarce heard amid the guns below. So the human nature is displacing actual nature due to the explosions, the detonations of armaments and so on. And I'm reminded as well, when I went to visit Vimy Ridge back in 2009, I saw also part of the area that's still fenced off as no man's land, a small portion of it, because of the fact there is still potentially live mines there. And one of the most interesting juxtapositions of nature and the ravages of war is the fact that they still have sheep grazing in that fenced off area, right? Because of course, if the sheep detonate a mine, okay, it's bad, but
we're having lamb chops tonight.
It's lunch. Yeah.
You're making me feel hungry. I shouldn't say that. You make me feel hungry all of a sudden. But also pointing out the fact that we are the dead, and the living dead. And I think of a great anti-war film called J'accuse, which was first released by Abel Gance, first released in 1918 and then re-released in 1938 deliberately because he wanted to warn everybody a new war is coming, and we should have learned the lessons of the first Great War. And he presents at the end of that war, presents a rank upon rank of the survivors of the Great War, French and Belgian survivors. He was Belgian himself. And of course, they are the walking wounded who represent the living dead, who surge into the camera frame at the end of that great film. But we are the dead, once loved and were loved. Right, when the most human emotion is loving and so forth, and being loved. But now we are dead here in Flanders Fields. one of the most interesting parts of this poem is that line, "Take up our quarrel with the foe." Because what's interesting about that is that quarrel is not necessarily until death do we battle kind of verb or noun rather.
Yes,
It's
yes.
it's more pacific than that. It's saying
Yeah,
It
we have an
is.
quarrel doesn't usually lend itself to
Yes.
blows being
Yeah.
yeah.
laid. Yeah,
And
you're right.
we can
Yeah.
have a debate here. We don't need to be killing each
Yeah,
other.
I
The
hadn't thought of that.
diplomacy can work out the quarrel, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. So take up our quarrel with the foe. Okay, yeah, an enemy still, but still, it's not put in the like let's slay them, kill them
Yeah,
dead
yeah,
like
yeah.
raid. It's not this. It's more gentle. Take up our quarrel with the foe. Help and from our failing hands we throw to you this responsibility, the torch of this responsibility, hold it high. Um, and in a sense, it's an appeal to try to prevent more war. Um, but if you have to, yeah, then you have to. And to keep faith with the ideals, which lay behind the quarrel. The ideals which lay behind the quarrel are what are important to hold on to, not the idea that you have to exterminate the foe, but the idea that you have to stand up for your ideals, which is a much more pacific way of putting it, as opposed to the grotesquerie of just kill them all, right? Get it over with. Kill them all and get it over with. Instead, we can have a debate, but we're going to hold on to our ideals, and treat the foe as an adversary, not as an enemy that we have to destroy or that we have to
Right.
vanquish necessarily. And so, the spirit behind this poem is one of nobility, one of recognizing courage, one of willingness to sacrifice, but it also has embedded within it the elements that could lead to peaceful debate, diplomacy, and the necessity of only having to take to arms when there is no possibility of those ideals being held up. As a torch for all to see. You can see also the idea of the torch. It's a symbol of enlightenment. It's a symbol
Yeah.
of rationalism, of the Enlightenment. That if we can be reasonable, then we don't need to necessarily be needing to massacre or to commit mass murder or to go into the ravages and destruction of war.
So it's quite idealistic,
Yeah, it
isn't it?
is.
Yeah,
In some ways.
you really made me think here, George, because it just dawned on me that this was written early. This was Canada's first major exposure. They'd only been in the line for a couple months. This is the first major battle, and the first. So he hadn't descended into, or hadn't been affected by a descent into the propaganda that subsequently came, and the myths of the crucified Canadians and all that kind of stuff. And so I think an inherent respect for the foe that he's talking about. That you really made me think here about when you're talking about the quarrel. It's talking, yeah. It's not necessarily the othering of the opponent at that point to some sort of to dehumanize them so that we can just get to focus on killing them. And there's a respect that's coming out there. If you're going to delineate it down to just a quarrel, this is an idea we can have a civilized discussion. But I guess, of course, perhaps he was not considering the already how many 4, 5, 6 million people had been killed across both Eastern and Western Front at that point.
Whoa.
Before the Canadians got into it, it was.
Well, you just see it from your own
Yeah, that's right.
small perspective at that point in time.
But
But
you really made me think about that, George. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Colin. Yeah, and there's another oddity here. Like the spirit of this poem is also for me the spirit of Vimy Ridge itself, and this brings back to mind a story I came across in the Toronto Star way back in 2007, which included a photograph, and the photograph was of Adolf Hitler visiting Vimy Ridge, and the fact that he had ordered his soldiers to not destroy it because they were in the habit of destroying many of the Allied war
yes,
memorials. And the
yes,
reason why is because, as atrocious and unspeakably evil as he was, as a World War I veteran as he was, he
Who had
realized,
served at Vimy?
yeah, that Vimy Ridge was about sorrow. It wasn't about
Yes.
triumph. It was just about
That's right.
sorrow. It was about regret. And so he said, we don't touch this. This stands. Um, and it was
Good old Adolf sticking up for us Canadians.
Al-
I think
Although,
we'll have to cut that part out of the recording.
well, Goebbels did refer to Canadian airmen as boers
Yes, he did.
flying over Germany, but maybe he was looking at it in the context of food, like wild boar. I think I'm still hung up on the sheep blowing up.
Yeah, but you know what? But I'm thinking right now too, as many of us have had to think recently about what does it mean for Canada specifically to be at war? Not that we want to be, not that we should ever be. On the other hand, we have been, and although I am a pacifist, and I truly am, I do have great pride in the sacrifices and the courage of our ancestors in liberating Europe and staving off the Boer, if not the Boer or the Bosch, so to speak, in World War One, and of course the Boer War as well, 1900, 1903, and in defending colonial Canada against American invasion. And this is a very difficult and tricky thing. I'm also thinking about William Hall, who almost single-handedly put down the Indian rebellion at Lucknow. And so a very difficult kind of Canadian war hero in terms of his defense of the empire and that famous battle. But it's a long way of saying, not to keep going on and on about all these heroes and so on, including those who fell at the end. And so I do have a lot of admiration for their stoicism. I think if there's one, I was just thinking about this the other day in terms of the current contretemps with the United States of America. And I was trying to think, what is the Canadian characteristic? What is the character of Canadians? What is the thing that is most characteristic of us? And this may seem like a very stupid word to use, but the word that came to my mind is we are stubborn. We are a stubborn bunch of folks, especially at battle. You know, uh, there's heroism, there's courage, and we're just stubborn. We don't give up. We just keep on. We keep on. We keep on. Against all odds, no matter the consequences.
It's funny you mentioned that because this poem, written right after the Second Battle of Ypres, which was all about, like, the Germans were astounded to find the Canadians hadn't given up and broken. They'd released gas, and apparently the first Germans coming over actually had their weapons slung over their shoulders. They weren't expecting any resistance.
Yes.
And I think stubborn and perhaps a little naivete, not knowing that we were technically beaten. We're like, we're staying here.
Yes.
We're going to fight.
Yeah. You know how long I spent digging this trench?
God damn it.
I'm not leaving.
Yeah, amen. Wow.
Well, there's an old story about the Canadian attitude in First World War, and that stubbornness and that aggressiveness and the bravery. And so the story goes, they're in a trench. British sentries were on the trench, and they hear some noise, and someone's coming up to the trench, and they say, "Halt! Who goes there?" And the answer comes back, "Grenadier Guards." So they say, "Pass, Grenadier Guards." They hear a few minutes later more troops coming down the line. They say, "Halt! Who goes there?" And the reply comes, 77th Regiment. So they then, okay, pass, 77th. The last time they hear more shuffling, they cry again, "Halt! Who goes there?" And the answer comes, "None of your damn business." So they say, "Pass, Canadians."
Woo! Yeah. That reminds me of that old World War II based film, The Devil's Brigade. Wasn't that it? About the Canadians and the Americans being
Special
trained.
Service Force.
Yeah.
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 Special service. Well,
All right.
I've seen in your notes, Colin, that you say that in Flanders Field, was actually painted on the wall of the Montreal
Well,
Canadiens.
the part that George had recited so well and reflected on afterwards about holding the torch high and passing it on, and you've probably seen that the greatest hockey team in the history of the world. Every time they have that ceremony, they actually use a torch, right, and they pass it on. And that's been painted. That's been painted around the dressing room for 70 years, and since 2020, I think it's 2017 or 2023, it's actually sewn in. That line is sewn into the neck of the jersey of all the Habs players. Yeah, so they take it pretty seriously.
Fantastic. Well, I find it's fitting that we end with a Canadian poem, one that turned grief into remembrance and remembrance into duty.
Yeah, indeed. And like all good poetry, it reminds us that behind every uniform, there's a heartbeat and sometimes a pen.
George, on behalf of the Rum Ration podcast, we'd thank you for coming on the show today. And it's been a real treat and having this wonderful conversation about war poetry, what it means and how relevant it is today. It's been a real pleasure.
Colin, Rejoy, look, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me, for inviting me to be here. It does really mean a lot. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for raising a glass with us on the Rum Ration.
You can find this episode and all of our others wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. Every little bit helps us keep the rum flowing.
So until next time, keep your powder dry and your poetry close.
Cheers to history.
Cheers to history.